Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Lucy Kurtzer-Ellenbogen. I'm the director of our Israeli, Palestinian, and broader Arab-Israeli conflict programming here at USIP. Welcome. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces. Equally wonderful, of course, to see some not so familiar faces. We hope you become familiar faces. And I know that we are all very appreciative and looking forward to the opportunity to engage today with members of the Hand in Hand school community from Israel. I'm going to introduce our panel to you just shortly, and I want them to do the work of introducing the Hand in Hand school to you, talking about what it's about, what it is, what they do. But by way of brief introduction and to sort of situate our conversation today, I believe everybody in this room is probably aware that just a couple of weeks ago now, 3 weeks ago almost, on November 29th, the Max Rain campus in Jerusalem, which is the flagship campus of the Hand in Hand school networks, and actually the photographs you're seeing on this slideshow that's running are from that campus. My colleague Britt Manzo and I were there just a couple of weeks ago, a few days after this happened, this being a particularly ugly attack on the campus of the school. Thankfully, nobody was hurt in this attack. 2 first grade classrooms were set on fire. There was racist and anti-assimilation graffiti plastered on the walls. But I think what makes the attack particularly ugly is that this attack very explicitly targeted the very core, the very heart of what the Hand in Hand schools are about. Namely, and in brief, and again you'll hear much more about this in our conversation, the idea and reality of a society shared by Jews and Arabs in Israel. Now, again, not to in any way minimize the attack, but what one could say is that perhaps a somewhat positive byproduct of what happened in the wake of this attack was the remarkable outpouring of support that you saw from outside the school community, from Jewish and Arab communities around the school, from in fact all across the country, from politicians who also got a lot of media attention, international and otherwise, and also, as you'll hear, the way the community itself came together in the wake of this attack. And I think all of that underscores what a unique, and I don't use that term lightly, or choose to use that term lightly, we're going to have Ned comment on this from his perspective later, but the unique role that the Hand in Hand school networks plays in Israel, but in the peace building community more broadly. And so to talk more about that today, I'm thrilled to introduce and have here with us Rebecca Bardak, who is the Director of Resource Development and Strategy at the Hand in Hand schools, and can also speak from the perspective of a parent of 2 students, a first grader and a second grader, both at the Max Rain campus in Jerusalem. We also have with us Moran Ibrahim, and Imbar Shaked Vardi, who are both 9th graders at the Max Rain campus in Jerusalem. And last but certainly not least, longtime friend and associate of USIP, Dr. Ned Lazarus. Ned is currently an assistant visiting professor at George Washington University, former Peace Scholar here at USIP when he was working on his dissertation. And I think it's fair to say that there are few people out there who have the breadth and depth of expertise that Ned has on the field of Israeli and Palestinian peace building. He's done a lot of work, including some work that we're fortunate enough to do with him here at USIP on impact evaluation of peace building initiatives in the Israeli and Palestinian context. And we're going to be asking him to draw on that and to comment from that perspective, situating Hand in Hand in that broader context. So, welcome, everybody. And without further ado, Rebecca, could you start off actually and do the situating for us? What is Hand in Hand, its mission, what it looks like, what you do?
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So first, it's important to understand the broader context in which Hand in Hand is situated in terms of the educational system in Israel. There's basically a tracked system by language and by communal preferences. There's a Hebrew language, an Arabic language school track. Within the Hebrew language track, there's a religious and secular track. As a parent, you have to choose which of these school choices do I want my child to go to. There's no school track which basically brings Jews and Arabs, religious and secular, together in one school framework in which they can grow up together, understand each other's histories and cultures and differences, nor to understand what their commonalities might be, and therefore no opportunity to create common ground. That's one thing when you're students, but it's much more significant when you think about the fact that these students become our citizens. In 1997, to fuse histories, religions, cultures, and we want to create something that's shared. With that started 25 kids in a first grade class in Jerusalem and 25 kids in the Galilee, Jewish and Arab. Now, 2014? We now have 5 schools throughout the country. Jerusalem is our flagship school. It goes from kindergarten through 12th grade. Last year was our 4th graduating class of 12th graders, with 620 students this year at that campus. An established school in the Galilee and in Kfar Kara, an Arab village in the Wadi Ara area, the Triangle area. Actually launches a 10-year plan of expanding our network to 10 to 15 schools throughout the country, each with a strong adult community surrounding it.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to talk actually a bit more about the adult community around it and the impact on the community a little later in the conversation. What I'd like to do now actually is turn to Imba and Moran to introduce themselves, because I think having had this introduction to the school, the next question is, well, who are these students? What is sort of a profile of students who go to this school? And we'd love to hear from you about who you are, what brings you to the school, your experience. I did want to mention, if you don't mind, that we're particularly grateful for you to be here. We know you've had a packed schedule, including last night lighting the Chanukah at the White House for the White House Chanukah party. And we do have a picture outside of that. And hopefully you might talk later. I can ask you about the Chanukah as well that you were lighting. But for now, we'd love to hear you introduce yourselves in your own words.
So my name is Moran. I live in Jerusalem with my mother, sister, and grandparents. I'm a Palestinian with Israeli citizenship from a Muslim family who has been living in Jerusalem for generations. Those are all my important parts of my identity. So my grandfather was a very well-known person. He was a singer. He was a famous singer. He has his own band. So I'm 14 years old. I went to school in hand-in-hand school when I was in 3rd grade 6 years ago. I was a gymnastic girl, riding horses, and I like dancing, listening to hip-hop music. That's all.
Wonderful. How about you, Imran?
I'm Inbar. I'm also 14, and I'm a Jewish Israeli. My parents were born in Israel, but my grandparents were all from Eastern Europe, and they moved to Israel before World War II. My father's father was in the Palmach, and he helped build Israel. And my mother's father was more in the academic. He won the Israel Prize a few years ago for Persian linguistic. My family is all very academic. My father's a professor, and he teaches classics in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And my mother also teaches there academic writing. I'm a vegan and a feminist and a supporter of the gay community, and I believe in all human rights and animals' rights. And I also spend my time like reading and watching movies and ballet dancing.
And Imba, how long, Moran, you said you started, when did you
Third
start having
grade.
3rd grade, and how about you?
I started in pre-kindergarten.
In pre-kindergarten. Okay, and can I ask the follow-up question, you know, at the age that you started school, maybe this was your parents' choice, but at this point, if you can talk about why hand in hand, what that means for each of you, and why that choice, either for you or your parents or both.
First, when I was young, that was my mom decided to me.
Right.
But when I grew up, I wanted to learn Hebrew and to be able to succeed in Israel. So I wanted to be in hand-in-hand school to keep fighting for our rights in the school and to never give up.
And how about you, Imbar?
Also, my parents chose the school at the first place, but when I wanted to go to high school, I could choose if I should stay in the school or move to an art school to learn dance. But I chose to stay in the school, especially after the summer we had with the war in Gaza and everything. I decided that it's really important to stay in the school, because the school is really the only place where you can make a change as a kid, because there are lots of organizations and workplaces where you can.
But when I grew up, I thought that it's my school, so I have to keep fighting for it, and it's a message. We have an important message to show the world that Arabs and Jews can live together, and to affect the world that we can live together. So
great, thank you. To switch gears for a little bit, I want to talk about the fire that I mentioned on November 29th. Rebecca, if you could just describe what happened, but then the timeline. Some of you, hopefully all of you, saw on your way in, we have poster boards up of the timeline since the attack on November 29th, saying what the school did, starting almost immediately. Rebecca, if you could talk us through some of that, and then I'd like to hear from Moran and Imbar, their reactions.
Saturday night of November 29th, our school principal, one of our co-principals, Nadia Kinani, who's also a founding parent and one of the founding teachers of a lot of the work that we do, received a phone call that there was perhaps some sort of fire, there was smoke at the school, and she should come. She thought, okay, fires happen. Should I change out of my pajamas? I guess so. She shows up at the school. It's dark. There are flames coming from the first grade area. They come in, and she's trying to figure out what's going on. And then she sees the first of the graffiti on one of the walls of the first grade area. And it says, Kahana was right. And then she sees death to Arabs, and there's no coexistence with cancer. And she realizes with this that this is not just a regular fire. She said then she saw the pile of books that they had burnt on the floor in the center of the first grade classroom area. And she thought, this is it, it's over. No parent will ever send their kid to this school again. And she said she felt totally alone. And then people started coming. And you had tens and then hundreds of parents and staff and students and alumni and the municipality and different figures within the municipality coming to say, I'm here, what can I do? And after the first shock and horror of realizing what had happened, we realized, okay, at 7:30 tomorrow morning, less than 12 hours from now, you've got 620 kids and their parents and the staff coming to school, and we have to be ready for that. So with that, everyone kicked into action, and we immediately said, okay, what are the 2 classrooms that we'll set up instead for these kids? So we took the 10th grade classrooms and we set them up with little chairs and little mats for the little kids. Immediately, the older kids and our community organizer began to do beautiful signs, "We refuse to be enemies," and just bright, cheery signs to greet the kids as they would come in. We realized that there would be, the teachers would have to have discussions with the kids first thing in the morning as class started. Well, to do that, you have to be prepared yourself. So we had immediately a psychologist came in, worked with the staff who was there. We sent out a message to all the staff, what had happened. You have to come to school early. We'll do a preparatory session. You'll then hold classes. What message do you send to the parents? Get everything translated into Hebrew and in Arabic, so that all the messages are going out in both languages, which is what we always do.
And this again, sorry, this is all between 7:30
This is all, at this point, it's between 9 p.m. and on.
Okay.
Yeah. Sitting with our key municipal figures, what to do, how to do it immediately, what's renovation, when can it start, how quickly can it happen. And okay, come on in, come into school. And basically what then followed was an absolutely unexpected outpouring of support. That throughout that morning and that day, and then the next day and the day after, and throughout that whole week, hundreds and then thousands of people coming from around Jerusalem, from around the country, coming and calling and sending messages to say, we condemn this attack and we support you. Jewish, Arab, religious, secular, an unprecedented amount of support for, on the one hand, we're public schools, we're under the government system, we're Ministry of Education schools, but still what we do is complicated in a conflict zone, and not everyone is supportive of it, and no one expected it. Everyone within was tremendously strengthened by that, and it gave them this resilience. You know, the parent who said at the Saturday night, I can't come back, I can't keep sending my kid here, within a day said, there's absolutely no other place that I want to be. And lots of people saying, you know, as they're seeing the outpouring of support, saying, it strengthens me. This gives me the determination to keep going. And at the same time, the people who were coming saying to us, I came here depressed and upset and distraught by what had happened. And now that we're here and we see you and we meet you and we see what you're doing and we see how you do it and the joy and the simplicity with which you do something that's complicated, we are inspired and it invigorates us. And we take this message back to where we you know, our communities and our offices and our schools. And there, what we began to see was this incredible cycle of we being strengthened internally by this support, but also that other people were taking this away and realizing that what we're doing in 5 schools and communities throughout the country with 1,200 students, some 5,000 parents and staff and community members, is a viable and scalable reality of Jewish-Arab shared living.
And I think you mentioned when Britt and I were just there a couple of weeks ago, you were talking, and one of the things that struck me was this notion of people from the outside coming to see what you were doing. And I think, you know, I don't want to misquote you here, but one of the things that I heard you saying, which resonated quite powerfully for me, was the notion that people realizing you were onto something, that they needed your help in understanding how to deal with this,
Right.
because they knew this was something that you had been dealing with throughout the years of your existence.
Yeah.
Right.
So even before this incident, you know, a month before this incident, there had been another graffiti attack of death to Arabs on the walls or the threshold of the school, outside of the school, at the school entrance. Also not the first, we've had a few prior to that. And that attack had been enough that the local educational authorities of Jerusalem had said, you know, this is coming in the broader context of growing voices of extremism and intolerance and a lot of anti-Arab sentiment that's been strengthened by various events taking place in Israel over the past months especially. And they said, we're struggling with this issue in our schools, in our classrooms, in the teachers' rooms throughout Jerusalem. And this, the last Death to Arabs attack, you know, graffiti attack, is making us realize that we need to really grapple with it in a new way. They brought all of the elementary school principals from throughout Jerusalem, some 40 principals, to our school for an intensive session on grappling with racism and intolerance. It's set off a series of things with government, several different governmental figures, including President Rivlin and Trachtenberg and others, who've been already over the past month coming to us and saying, what is it you do and how do you do it and how can we start to extract some lessons from that as we try to deal with this much more broadly within our society.
Great, thank you. I want, before we turn to Ned, Moran and Bar, if I can just ask you, you know, I've just heard Rebecca describe what happened and how they and the school community kicked into gear after the fire. How did you experience this as students? What was your reactions? What were your reactions?
When I heard, I was shocked. I kept thinking about the children who were drawing in their own notebook from the beginning of the year and asking their own parents, where's my notebook? Well, it's on fire. After I heard the news that our school is on fire, I didn't want to come to school, but my friends, because I was scared, but my friends reminded me that that's what they want. So we did the opposite. We came, many schools came to support us. There's a Jewish girl told me that I hope one day Arabs people and Jewish people can live together in my own language, and I was surprised and speechless because she said she's a Jewish girl and she said it in Arabic, and we will keep on fighting for our school.
How about you, Bar?
So when I heard, I don't think I felt anything. I think My heart like dropped for a second. My father went there, went to school. Not that there was anything they could do until the fire was put off, but just to stand there, to be with everyone, to see what's going to happen next. So I think the first thing I did after I kind of recovered from the shock was opening the WhatsApp group of our class, and I saw that many kids didn't want to come. Many kids were scared to come after this kind of thing. And me and another girl in my class and our teacher tried to convince them that it's really important to come, especially because that's exactly what these people want. They want to stop the effect of our school. They want to stop the dialogue that we're having. But we can't let them win in this. We have to keep fighting and keep coming to school and doing what we do every day, because that's exactly the reason we're here. And we've been dealing with this kind of things for a really long time, and we know how to handle it. And we have media all the time. It wasn't, it was bigger, but it wasn't anything special. And after we came to school and we saw the support, and we saw so many people from the government and people that we never thought would be on our side came and supported us. And
you know, it makes you think. You, Rebecca, you had a piece up on the website, and actually I think it's out on one of the handouts we had out there. And just listening to Invar speak, one of the powerful lines I think in that piece you had, I'm just going to quote, said, "The question we asked ourselves was not why did this happen. The context of conflict in which we live provides an answer to that question on a daily basis. The question we asked ourselves was what can be done." You know, on that notion, what can be done, we've sort of talked about the broad notion of what Hand in Hand stands for and what it is. But one of the things that we've had the chance to discuss before, and I know Ned has also looked at and we've had conversations about, is, you know, it's very easy to look at projects like this sometimes and say, well, that's very nice, but how attached to reality is it? Or, you know, how much are people really grappling with the real issues and just living in a bubble? And what I'd like to talk about, if I can just ask you briefly to address Rebecca, and then I'd like to turn to Ned for some perspective on this, is one of the things that you've said when we've talked before is that unlike other peace building programs, let's think of, say, a dialogue activity, what often happens when things get tough, there's a challenging political environment, a terrorist attack, something like this, people walk away, they tend to fall apart. And as you said, because this is where people go to school, it's not that easy. You can't just walk away from it. So if you can talk a little bit about how the school actually grapples with the reality of the conflict while educating students.
So I think first and foremost, sort of the guiding principles are we agree to disagree. It's okay to not all be on the same page. We're not trying to force everyone to come to the some sort of, you know, common agreement about the situation or what ought to be done. We allow for open, honest discussion about everything as it happens. The fact that it's a daily framework, the fact that you have a school framework where every single day you have students coming back to the classroom. We have a co-teacher model for all the younger grades of a Jewish and Arab co-teacher. So you have the language and the representation of all the things that come with that. Means that you must find a way to talk through the issues in a way that's real and honest, but will not destroy your inclusive framework. And it's something that, you know, again, as you say, that it's in many of the sort of coexistence types projects, when things are difficult, it's hard. It's hard to come together. And those are hard emotions that come, and how do you deal with that? Or there's, you know, maybe, you know, border issues of not being able to cross over. And we have to grapple with the way of how to do it. You know, there's many people who do believe in this idea of togetherness, coexistence, some sort of broader solution, but how do you make it happen? How do you implement that idea? Because we're a school where every single day you're coming back together again, you have to figure out how to do it. You have to find the way to do that. You know, tomorrow morning the school bell is going to ring, and you have to be ready to walk into that classroom. And that right there, you know, based on that, with the starting factor that everyone's saying we're committed to this and we're committed to making this happen, then everything flows from that sort of core principle.
So, Ned, I know that you've looked at a lot, as I mentioned earlier, peace building programs, and it's very closely as well at Hand in Hand School. And something that strikes me when I think of this broadly, you know, I used the word unique before, and, you know, again, correct me if I'm wrong there, but when I look around, what I think of as similar, and I highlight the word similar here because I can't think of anything identical, similar models in other conflict zones where my understanding is people have tried something like this. If I think of, say, Northern Ireland or Bosnia-Herzegovina, my understanding of those is a lot of times it might be bringing people together, but it's not necessarily grappling with some of these issues head on. So if you could just talk about the implications of the hand-in-hand school model from a peace-building practice and maybe resilience perspective.
Sure. I think, well, one of the themes I think we've all heard very clearly has been, as you said, resilience and this very powerful response to the recent crisis. And having been privileged to spend some time with the program in the last few years, to see the different campuses and to see the community events where they bring together parents and people from the neighboring communities, to hear the stories of how this developed. And this is only the latest in a number of incidents that Hand in Hand has gone through, but I think the larger picture is that Hand in Hand it's a response to a crisis, meaning everyone in the country is living in an unresolved crisis. The way that is dealt with in the majority fashion is through separation. As you said, tract schools where people don't interact and they don't talk about the content of that crisis. In Northern Ireland and in Bosnia-Herzegovina, two of the locations you talked about, in the post-conflict setting, there have been some integrated schools where people from the conflicting groups go to school together and they occupy the same physical space together. But in most of those cases, they don't. In Bosnia, they often don't occupy even the same sort of curricular space together, and sometimes even go to school at different times in the day. In Northern Ireland, they do go to school together, but the way they agree to disagree, according to most of the studies, is largely just not to talk about the conflict. So they learn science, they learn math, they learn that the others are human beings, they build relationships, and that's all positive, but they don't go there. They don't talk about the crisis that they live in or that their populations live in. Hand in hand, they go there. They deal with it head on. It's very open. It's very prominent. There's not a dichotomy between being together as human beings and being who you are as a Palestinian, as an Arab, as an Israeli, and a Jew. That's all dealt with very openly. I think the most remarkable example of this, you have to think about what that entails. I mean, I don't want to give the idea that this is a simple process or that this is harmonious or easy. That wouldn't be real at all. It's very challenging, it's very complex, it's messy, because that's what it means to actually engage with this reality. But in Hand, every year, from beginning on March 30th and then going into May, they have 5 what they call national days. So this is part of the Israeli and Palestinian national calendars, which are all laden with historical memory and conflict events. On March 30th, there's Land Day, which is a memory of protests by the Palestinian citizens of Israel, in which people were killed protesting against land confiscation. And then next comes Holocaust Remembrance Day. There comes the Memorial Day for Israel's fallen soldiers, which goes right into Israeli Independence Day. And then the last, did I get the order correct?
Yeah.
The last is what the Palestinians remember as Nakba Day, the remembrance of the tragedy that the Palestinians suffered, the flight of hundreds of thousands of refugees in the war that followed the creation of Israel. And they have mixed classrooms at all grade levels. They have teachers teaching together. They have parents who are watching and care about the content of what their children are learning. They have a Ministry of Education. They have lots of eyes on them all the time. And every year, and every one of those grades and every one of those schools, every one of those classrooms, they deal with each of these issues. And that's remarkable. That's a subject that very few people in the entire country are willing to engage together. But they're raising their children in a way that's very aware that there's a dissonance here, that there's an issue here, that we have different groups, and they're trying to raise them in awareness even of that history and even of the painful parts that are unresolved. I think the remarkable way in which I saw this happen was actually in the hand-in-hand teachers workshop that I attended in summer, a couple summers ago. So they brought together all the teachers from all the different schools for a 3-day workshop. And the teachers actually designed many of the sessions to work on, challenging issues that they all face. So there was a session about the national days and how do you deal with this in your classroom? And it gets very nuts and bolts, very down to, okay, well, what are you going to do? What materials are you going to share with the students? How are you going to present this? That was a very, very well attended workshop. Lots of teachers were there. They all shared their different experiences, their different challenges, the responses of students, responses of parents. But they did an exercise where they took out photographs and symbols, like the key of the refugee's key to their home, words in Arabic and Hebrew symbolizing the Nakba and the displacement. This is very politically charged stuff in Israel. If you know the context, there's been legislation to try and prevent this from happening. But these teachers took all these things out, and they had each different symbol and different word, and they scattered them on the floor, and then worked together in Jewish-Arab pairs, taking out each one of these and talking about how they had dealt with this issue in their classroom. And it was remarkable to watch them among all of these images of the 1948 war and all of these symbols that are so charged. And they sat down together and picked them up, and they were just sort of wandering around with the images of the war and the narratives and the conflict all around them, together and talking about it. And it was really, it was a remarkable scene. It's something I haven't forgotten, and I thought it kind of embodied the courage that they have, the courage, and also I think for people who say this is naive, I think it's quite the opposite. They're actually engaging with the hard reality.
We keep using the word remarkable. I think we sort of, as I said, there's something going on here that is certainly different and noteworthy. To start talking about some of the challenges, because obviously as it raises, this is, this could not possibly be a model that doesn't come with its challenges. And I think there are layers of challenges here. There's the layers of challenges of doing what Ned just described, which in many ways seems to me experimental on a sort of broad international scale of peace building. But there's also the challenge that comes with any school and all the layers of that school, right? It's dealing with those kind of conflicting narratives and identities. There's wanting it to be a place that's academically challenging and rigorous. There's dealing with teaching bilingually. I mean, you have all these layers of challenges. So, Rebecca, if you could talk about, I mean, I maybe have named just some of them, maybe there are others, and how you begin to address some of those.
First of all, it's a school. The schools are schools, and we're under the Ministry of Education. So the first challenge is providing a top-notch academic experience and doing it within the Ministry of Education system and using that curriculum. And then, what do you add to that? How do you build on top of that? How do you develop what's become sort of a co-teaching model of a Jewish and Arab co-teacher working together? How do you deal with religion? So obviously in Israel you have the Jewish calendar as the primary calendar. We've got kids who are Muslim and Christian and Jewish, and the core guiding principles of the hand-in-hand framework are that we should be equal and bring in everything, so we do all the holidays. Don't worry, we have the same number of days on as off. How do you teach art and music and the things where you can bring in different cultural perspectives? And of course, how do you teach history? And how do you talk about current events? And for us, it's really a question of, as Ned points out, this is how we deal with the conflict. The choice of the parent. No parent ends up at the school by accident. You choose it as a way of basically giving you agency to choose something else in the reality in which we live, and to make a personal decision and choose a path that is basically building something together. I'd say with our Ministry of Education officials, the relationships in the beginning of sort of working with them as we've established any one of our schools, it's often a slow process. They start off a little suspicious. What is this about? You're outside of their bureaucratic boxes of tracking, and we're outside of the social constructs and the social boxes in which we all live. And then what we find over and over and over again is that with time, as we start to work with them, they have become our biggest fans. And the work that we do is, as you say, fully understood, fully known, what we do, how we do it, what's the spirit of it, what's the content of it. And we have over and over the local educational authorities being our biggest advocates, both back to us and sort of saying, giving us positive feedback and recognition, but also as we've started to expand into other municipalities that we've brought, for example, when Tel Aviv and when Haifa were considering, do we recognize a school in our locales? We brought them to Jerusalem. We said, come see what this idea that we're talking to you looks like 15 years in. And they come and they see and they meet, and then they meet our local educational authorities, who say, including one of the most senior people with a kippah on his head, a very Orthodox man, and he says what this school does for the city of Jerusalem is amazing, and every city in Israel should have a school like this. And that kind of warm, full support is what we start to get over and over in each of our locations. But that's something that takes constant working and openness and cooperation. So those are.
What about now? The total student body in the network of schools is how many now? 12?
Across our 5 schools, it's about 1,200.
About 1,200. And what proportion of that? How does that break down in terms of Jewish Arab student population?
So our goal is that every single class and every single community activity should all be perfectly 50-50. It's about 60-40 across the board of the schools in terms of 60% Arab and 40% Jewish.
Okay. And the Jerusalem school goes all the way through 12th grade at that point. And what if you can just lay out the other schools where they are at this point, the other campuses?
So the other schools are Wadi Ara is in the Triangle area. That's Kfar Kara and the Galilee, and then Jaffa and Chaitin.
Right, but what grades those go up to? Sorry, no, that was mine.
So the Galilee and the Kfar Kara school are through elementary, and the other 2 schools are at the moment preschool, but growing quickly.
Now, something else that we've talked about before is that balance you said is hard. I mean, you're now at, you said 60-40, which is moving up. But if you could speak to some of the challenges that, because obviously there are different interests here from the different segments of the community who choose to go to this school. They're looking for maybe different things in school, coming for different motivations, and how that's impacted, your numbers and the retention rates.
Right. So first of all, I'd say on average, a Jewish family is coming for more ideological reasons, and on average, an Arab family is coming because they see this as a path to social mobility, basically, in Israel, to have top language skills, etc. And with that also comes sort of different general preferences of those communities. The Jewish parents tend to prefer much more in humanities and sort of a good social experience. And the Arab families want to have top-notch in math and science, etc. And so how do you find sort of the right balance between those different cultural expectations that come? And what we found, for example, in our Jerusalem school, which is going from pre-K to 12th grade, means that you've got kids for some 13 years, let's say. So if you start with a class of 30, and it's 15-15 in terms of Jewish-Arab breakdown, and then a couple of the Jewish kids go somewhere else in the, along the way, move cities or go to another school because they have a lot of school options. Right. It's very hard at 6th grade, let's say, to bring in another whole, 5 or 6 Jewish kids to replace the Arab, the Jewish kids who might have left. But now at our high school, for example, the starting grade of the high school is double in numbers and even in numbers, and that's because of the hard work we've done at making the high school a rich program for everybody. At the new preschool in Jaffa and also in Haifa, the numbers in the classes are balanced, and the waiting lists are even balanced in numbers. So it's something that is appealing to people from both communities, and people are bringing that out into their communities in terms of the impact.
So turning back to Ned now to talk about, I mentioned at the beginning that much of your work in the peacebuilding field has been focused on impact evaluation. So when you have looked at the hand-in-hand school the way you have, and again in the context of other endeavors you've looked at, what have you seen, and what have others who've looked at this seen in terms of the impact this structure and system is having both on the student level and maybe on the broader community level? And then of course I'd like to hear from Inbar Moran about the impact you would describe it as having on you individually. But Ned, if you could just say a little bit about that.
Sure. I think what we've heard is that they have a strategic vision. Mm-hmm. Really, it works at multiple levels. So you have the level of the school itself, and there you're looking. If you're asking about impact, you would say, okay, what's the impact on the students? What added value comes to students going to this kind of school instead of going to normal separate schools and then perhaps participating in a peace education program outside of school? And what I found very quickly is that you don't just look for impact actually among the students, but among the teachers and the way that they have to teach together, and that they have to teach this content that's looking at both histories and both narratives, as well as the parents, I think, were mentioned many times. So the circles that are impacted by each school actually grow in that sense. But Rebecca and Shuli Dichter and Inas Deeb, the education director, all articulate a broad strategic vision in which you don't just have the micro level, you don't just have the impact on the school, but they've actually built now a program and gotten large grants to support it for having what they call shared communities. So each school is meant to be a community space, and at the Jerusalem school there are language classes where Jews come to learn Arabic and Arabs come to learn Hebrew. There's a basketball team, mixed men's basketball team, which I think won the city championship last year.
Lots of fun.
But there are a number of activities. There are events in the Galilee. In the Galilee, where the school is actually, it's the only school located in an Arab municipality where Jewish students go to school. But in that area in Wadi Ara, on Ramadan, they had a huge festival. It had, I think it was about 400 people, open air, nighttime gathering. Took people on a tour of al-Fahim afterwards, and al-Fahim is it's one of the places in Israel where the majority of Jewish Israelis would never even think of going, but they went to enjoy nightlife there in al-Fahim. So there's a concerted effort and to bring this, to turn the school into more of a, not just a school, but also a community center, also what might be called a touch point, or a space of shared community that's bringing people together from outside and giving them experiences, tastes of this possibility. And then, of course, they're trying to expand the network of schools so that it gets into more and more areas in the country so that more people are exposed to it. Shuli Dichter, when he's the executive director, when he talks about it, he has a very strong vision. He also has a vision about what he calls turning it into a civic power. And he has this a vision of in 10, 15 years, he'll tell you there will be schools in 10 to 15 areas, and they will represent a voice of shared society, of a segment of the society that does want to engage with each other, that does want to live together or live in engagement between the Jews and Arabs, to have a shared vision. And that's, of course, that's only one group in the society. It's a very large society. There are other groups that would not agree to that vision at all. But what he's pointing out is that that's largely missing, that voice isn't there, but they're hoping to bring that voice into the national conversation. And I think actually what we see in the response to the current crisis, to the arson attack on the school, and the way that even the highest level authorities, the President of Israel, the President of the United States, have responded, is that in an event like that, where you actually see this resistance from radical elements, you also see that they are a voice, that they're achieving larger levels of recognition. They're becoming a voice in the conversation. It's becoming something that the wider community is learning about. You did ask about impact, and I would say that I think it's visible in that recognition. I think it's visible in what they've constructed over time. This is a project I believe you said started in 1997, and it's important to think about the context. We all know what's happened in the Middle East conflict since 1997. We all know the Second Intifada, the separation barrier, the failures of negotiations, the escalation of regional conflict, all of the things that have happened. In that context, this network of schools has grown. It's almost counterintuitive. In the context of escalating racism and extremism that's been coming out in segments of Israeli society, this network has grown. It's gone to more places. There's actually demand in some communities where they haven't been able to build the schools yet. So I think you can, in fact, see that there's a good deal of impact. In terms of the students themselves, there have been a number of studies. And the primary thing I think they found, Zvi Beckerman, who's been researching hand in hand for quite a while, said that the difference between control groups, he'll interview a control group of students from the normal school system and then a group of hand in hand students, is that students from hand in hand speak with much more complexity and nuance. They're much more articulate and much more complex and much more nuanced in the way that they address their own identity, the other's identity, and the conflict. So it doesn't mean that they all share the same political opinions. It doesn't mean that they're all peace activists. But what it means is that through this experience, they're gaining a much more nuanced perspective and much more awareness. They're both more aware of identity, but also able to think about it in a much more complex way. That was one of the key findings. Another one said that they don't essentialize the other group. They are very aware that the other group is made up of different individuals and has internal diversity. And so I think those are both on the micro level and then on the larger level, I think we can see actually some very strong signs of impact.
Thank you. Now, on that note, not essentializing, you've just heard lots of us talk about you and what other people have said about you. So I'd love to hear on this issue of, Ned was talking about the school and the reactions from the community outside the school. How is it for you when you interact with your friends or members of your community who are not part of the hand-in-hand school? What is that experience like for you?
Well, some people really support. Some people are really excited when I tell them I go to this school. The first reaction is, oh, cool, so you know Arabic and you can speak and can you write my name? But there are people, since the summer, since the war in Gaza, sometimes I'm scared to say that I go to this school because people react badly, and they think that they think that it's crazy or that it's weird or that I'm learning with enemies or that I'm friends with, that if I'm friends with one Arab person, I'm supporting terrorists, and which is just not true, because like in every society there are good people and bad people, and it's not that all the Arabs are terrorists, and it's not that all the Jews are, well.
Right. And how about for you, Moran?
Also, my friends are excited that I learn in hand. So, they're so excited that I speak Hebrew and what Inbar said. But outside of the school, sometimes I am afraid to speak Arabic, even on the phone, because I'm afraid. So, but in the school, inside of the school, we have something to share with other, and I feel myself inside of the school, so it's safer.
If I can ask one more question, I want to throw open to the many questions I know that we must have from the audience. But just, you've heard lots of descriptions of your school as doing something unique. And on the other hand, one of the things that when Britt and I were there, we remarked at the time on the campus that one of the things that you really notice about the school is it feels like a school, right? It feels like any school. You go to school and it's you recognize it. And then you stop. For someone like me coming in from the outside, you stop and you realize that this is something different going on, the way that Rebecca has described it in that particular context. When you are there, and you both have now been there for a number of years, do you feel like you're aware constantly on a daily basis that this is something different? Or does it just feel like school and normal to you?
Usually it just feels like school. Feels like the place that your parents force you to go to and wake you up at 7 in the morning when you could get a few more hours sleep. And they force you to sit in class for 8 hours a day and learn about things you don't really care about.
We should have started with this question.
After since people started talking about us on the news and asking us how does it work with the languages and how does it work with religion, and we start to see that outside of the school people see us as different, and we start to see ourselves as different.
Moran, would you agree with that? Or do you have
Yes,
Yeah.
totally. I think our school is special, of course. Not all the people agree with us, but I think we do the right thing, that we can make different people share together something. So yes, I agree with Inbar.
Well, thank you.
Can I actually just add
yes,
one thing on the
please.
community stuff?
Of course.
Just to articulate a little bit more about the community work, because what we realized a few years ago, this idea of expanding the network wasn't just about schools. A core issue there that we were thinking a lot about was you can't dump solving this broader conflict on the shoulders of 12, or in this case 14-year-olds. It's not realistic, it's not feasible. We certainly can't wait for them to become the 55-year-olds to become the decision makers. It's got to be upon the shoulders of the adults who lead the way, who make this viable. And with that, we began in a very concerted and conscious process of institutionalizing the communities around each of the schools. Naturally, as in most schools, there's some sort of community activity that takes place by adults, by parents, but it sort of comes and goes depending on who's the eager parent to lead some sort of process. Mm-hmm. What we realized is each school has to have a strong adult community that's organized, that has a combination of, one could say, being and doing of community. Fun activities, excursions, picnics, just enjoying being together, but also doing. Learning language, learning in particular for Jews to be learning Arabic, because that's where most Arabs know Hebrew. Dialogue groups, text study, and when necessary, social action to have an opportunity to respond to what's going on around us. Let the schools be schools, even within all the unusual things that we're doing, and let the broader process of social change be led by adults who are the ones responsible to make this path a broader path, and then amplify that out. It's not enough that we're doing this within our school walls. It has to be something that's open to the broader public and heard about by a much broader public. Ultimately, it's true now with 5 locations, and it'll be certainly that much more true with 10 to 15 locations, 15 to 20,000 people involved in that day-to-day experience of shared life. You can perhaps not like it, you don't have to believe in it, but you can no longer deny that it's viable, nor that it's scalable, because both are the case.
Thank you. I hope also in the questions we'll get to, you mentioned the social action. There's so much we didn't talk about in terms of the walks and the action that happened this summer and again since then. But I would like to open to questions. Do we have a mic that's going around? We have a mic at the front, so if people who want to ask questions want to come up. And if your question is to somebody in particular, please, on the panel, please note that. Otherwise, we'll sort it out among ourselves who takes the question. So yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name, the Palestinian student.
Moran.
Moran. I wanted to ask Moran, did you learn anything in the school about Yom HaAtzmaut, and how do you feel about what you learned? And in Bar, did you learn anything about the Nakba Day, and what do you feel about what you learned?
Thank you.
I learned a lot about Nakba since I went to the school, because I had no idea about it or about any other day. I mean, I didn't know about the Holocaust, I think, before I went to school. But we learned them together. It was something that happened and something about the history of this place, and we had to learn about it. We feel sympathy to all of these national days. We have activities every Nakba Day about the country, about the villages that were ruined, about people that were kicked out of their homes. We talk to them, we know them. Some of the kids in our classes are all third or
Descendants.
second generation.
Descendants of people who...
Yeah. So we feel sympathy. We understand them, and we know that that just because we celebrate the independence of our country means someone else lost. In every war, if one side wins, the other side has to lose, and we know that, and we understand that.
I also learned a lot about Jews. Shoah.
The Holocaust.
Holocaust, yes. When they feel sorry, we feel sorry for them. When they're happy, we celebrate. We share everything together when we learn together. So, of course, I learned a lot about the Jews.
Howard.
Thank you. Thank you, and welcome. It's great to see you. I saw you on the video with the president last night. I thought that was terrific. So, Ned, you talked a little bit about impact, and one aspect of impact is what the future holds for the kids who graduate from this program. You didn't talk about that. The school's had 17 or 18 years of experience, and you have some graduates who are out there, and the Jewish kids head for a very different future than the Arab kids. Jewish kids are heading for the IDF, the Arab kids going to college, going to work, whatever they're doing. And I think there are a lot of issues about Arab identity and how they come out of a program like this. I'll tell a very quick, I have about 6 questions, so I'm only going to ask this one. But it's a very quick story from when I was working in Israel, and I had Arab staff as well as Jewish staff. And I was in Gilboa. We had a meeting with authorities from Gilboa and Jenin, and we're always trying to put people together and get some projects going. And there was a Christian Arab Jaffa staff member of mine who was there with me, and since I'm a language imbecile, she was interpreting, and she did a fine job interpreting the Hebrew that the Gilboan head of council spoke. And then when one of the Arabs from Jenin began to speak, and I turned to her and I said, can you interpret for me? And she couldn't do it. She's a fluent, what I would describe as a fluent Arab speaker, but growing up in Jaffa, she learned Hebrew, she went to school in Hebrew, and she had, as a Christian Arab from Jaffa, very much a Hebrew identity. And so, and I saw this in a lot of the staff, and the question is, how do the adults who come through programs like this grapple with that identity issue?
Rebecca or Ned, maybe.
Ned, do you want to add? I don't mind.
Oh, I think you're much better disposed to respond to that.
So first of all, just to be clear, we've only had this past June our 4th graduating class. So the kids are for the most part still either in Army or in university, respectively. So sort of the long-term results have yet to be seen. But the Arab kids are a lot of them at top universities in Israel or elsewhere internationally. What I would say in terms of identity, that we're the kids grow up within our framework with a very clear sense of identity, that you're, by nature of learning together, learning about each other, understanding each other's differences and who we are individually, means that you're getting a lot of identity clarification. In terms of the language component of that, in terms of how high quality is your, let's say in this case, Arabic, we also have been through an evolution of our model, meaning we're creating a lot of this model of language of learning from scratch. So in the early years, for example, there had been a decision, we want no separation because the ideological premise of the school of no separation, even in language class. So okay, when you're in kindergarten, that's one thing, or first grade, let's say, but as the kids started to get older, and they were all learning things together, all language instruction, invariably it slows to the level of the lower kids, so that when you were doing Arabic, it would tend to be closer to the level of the Hebrew-speaking kids to be able to keep up. Eventually we found that the Arabic of our students, of the Arab students in national tests, was below average. Well, obviously that wasn't what anybody intended. And so we said, okay, let's revise the model. That's a nice ideological principle of zero separation. It's not working. So for language instruction, per language instruction, that's now done separately at a mother tongue and foreign language level, basically. And now the Arabic has gone way above average of our Arab kids. For the Jewish kids, their Arabic is far better than any other Jewish kid is going to be, because you're growing up in a fully bilingual environment. But still, is it at the levels we want? Both in terms of the written and the spoken, which for those of you who know Arabic are very different. So there too, we're sort of revising and continually upgrading and trying to figure out our own measurements in order to improve it. Obviously, language and identity are very linked, and it's an important aspect to us that both within our framework that these kids are growing up with a clear sense of identity. The research shows, as Ned's mentioned, our kids are growing up with many kids in Israel in a homogenous framework will grow up with an essentialist understanding of identity, that they see people as Jews and Arabs as essentially different, fundamentally different at some, almost like different types of human beings level. In our framework, they understand difference. They understand what those differences are. They have knowledge about it. They have empathy towards it, but they don't see each other as essentially different. They see each other as essentially the same. And upon that, we're building what we're doing.
Thank you.
I think the question that Howard asked, I'm sorry about my voice. The question that Howard asked is an important one. It just brings up the challenge of what they're doing. I mean, this is a fundamentally asymmetrical context. These are societies that are different, they're structured differently, culture is different, and because of the conflict, there are these very stark divergences, such as the Jewish kids being drafted into the military at 18 and the Palestinians not. And having looked at other programs that work with youth, this is a tremendous challenge. Youth who have been very active in peace building for a number of years, who have been very dedicated, are now forced to join not just separate contexts, but to be part of the conflict and to represent sort of the violent end of the conflict, at least in the eyes of their peers. So this is a tremendous challenge. There isn't an answer to that. There's no perfect answer to that. There's only trying to deal with it as best as they can. And I think there's not enough. I think there's not yet a critical mass of their alumni to look at that. But I think it's a very important question: is how they will give them the forums to try and deal with that, to try and talk through it. It's inevitable and it's very difficult. But this is part of the challenge they take on by being willing to integrate their education and have their kids grow up together in a fundamentally asymmetric context. One more item on that. One of the reasons that we might not know enough about it is that one of the crises, one of the challenges they faced is that in the early years of the development of the Jerusalem school, after 6th grade, a good deal of the Jewish students left to other schools in their first groups because they have a whole bunch of different options available that will help prepare them for the army, that will get them ready for college, and they have all these different options, so they didn't stay after 6th grade. And so the first few classes came out, I believe, majority Arab students. And this is a fundamental challenge for them. They didn't stop at that point, and now they've taken very serious measures and campaigns to address that and to keep the Jewish kids in the school through high school. And I think, as you said, the 9th grade class is now fully integrated, and that's a tremendous achievement in this context. So it's important that you've brought out, what is the reality that they're working in, and it's equally important and not to be taken for granted that they are in fact dealing with these challenges pretty impressively.
But in other words, this is a longitudinal impact evaluation in the making. I mean, we're sort of, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is what it's eventually going to head towards when there's enough data to get there. Adina.
Okay, so many moons ago, when I was in 11th and 12th grade, I was a participant in some of the first Arab Jewish activities in Israel. So things have come a long way, and two of the things that stand out for me, the fact that you feel sometimes that it's just a normal school is actually a symbol of its success, because the whole point is that even though you're doing something with purpose every day, it's also it should be a normal thing, that's how people interact. And the second thing, which will lead to my question, which is tackling, it's not like the parents and teachers are instilling or imparting knowledge on you about what the answer should be, but rather that it's a work in progress with everyone taking place. Being that that's the case, we know that in Israel, well, in general, but in Israel there are many more cleavages than just the Israeli-Palestinian one, or the Jewish-Arab one. And so my question is how, given that you're tackling so many things in the conflict, I know, for example, one of the things I work on is the cleavages among Jewish groups, which I think is intrinsically connected to. So Mizrahi and Ashkenazi is intrinsically connected to Jewish Palestinian in many different ways, overt and not so overt. What's the breakdown of the Jewish and the Palestinian populations within
Within the groups. Yeah.
In terms of the, not just numbers, obviously.
in terms of origins, places of origin of the parents, backgrounds, ethnic and religious lines?
So, I mean, we have a pretty broad range within our schools, and it tends to reflect the local population. So in Jerusalem, you've got, let's say, of the Arab population, it's about 30% Christian, the rest are Muslim of the Arab population. In each of our school locations, it reflects the local groups. On the one hand, you probably have a higher percentage of upper middle class educated, but you have a growing number who are of all social backgrounds, and also Mizrahi background, and also, a range. The bigger you get and the more you're just known also as a good school, then the more attractive you become to a broader range of people. Not huge numbers of religious Jews, let's say, but also growing numbers of religious Jews who might be on staff, or some coming to the school also in attendance. So I would say that the fact that we are forever understanding things from different perspectives means that you become more nuanced, not just about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but about everything, about social realities, about social challenges. And our students tend to become critical thinkers and able to really identify and analyze a range of social issues, but without judgment per se, and with a tremendous amount of empathy for different perspectives and different realities.
Thank you.
I think you were before me.
Okay.
Okay. So
Okay.
go
Thank you.
Okay.
Let's try to alternate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My question is along those lines. Can you give us a breakdown on what percentage are religiously observant or devout in Jewish, Christian, Muslim groups, both faculty and families?
We're not tracking that specifically. I would say amongst the Muslim families, you get a range of religious and secular, which is more visible, certainly with the women with the hijab, let's say.
Right.
Amongst Christian families, you get a range, although the level of religiosity, I think, is less of a factor in the broader context in which we're working.
Right.
Of the Jewish side, we do have, like I said, some Orthodox staffs, a few Orthodox or conservative Jewish families. By nature of the tracking system, most religious families are still going to choose a religious track school, even though I do have a number of people who say, oh, I would love to go there, but I don't want to miss out on the religious text study that I get at a regular school. But we have a few families who've joined this past year who have been very eager to start, they're Orthodox families, they're observant, and they say, I want this to be my primary framework, and we'll figure out an enrichment program, which they're sort of piloting on the side independently under the school framework, in the building on Fridays, which is a day off for school there, and they're trying to make that work. And so hopefully that's something that can be,
But for right now, the Jewish students tend to be from secular backgrounds
secular
compared
or
with
religious, but not sort of halachically strictly observant, let's say.
And I was interested in what neighborhood. Where are you located?
The Jerusalem School is in the Pat neighborhood, near Beit Safafa, is an Arab part of. It's an Arab, used to be a village. It's along basically the 1967 border, runs along the side of the school. We're on the pre-67 side of that.
Okay. So I just wondered about the reaction of the local community geographically.
Not always keen.
Okay.
From both, first from the Jewish neighborhood in which we're situated, but they've, we're growing on them.
Okay, so I wanted to comment. Let's ask a question. First of all, my name is Oded Leshem. I'm a Jewish Israeli from Israel, and I'm doing my PhD now in the School of Conflict Analysis and Resolution, George Mason University. I'm a Jerusalemite myself. And I just wanted to remind us that there are forces that are trying to stop these kind of initiatives, both in the political arena and in the social arena. So these kind of beautiful initiatives, the schools and other Palestinian/Arab Jewish partnership programs are trying to be shut down by either political forces or by just the public. So if you see, I'm just saying it because you, of course, have to present the positive sides, but there is also the negative context of the Israeli society. Reactions to what happened 2 weeks ago were some of them were very supportive of the school, but some of them were not supportive and supported the attack. So actually, if we look at the future, if these kind of programs do not expand, the forces that are trying to decrease them might win this kind of battle. So we always have to continue and strive to expand these kind of initiatives. And I would say that this could be also something that USIP should try to think about, not only like in the context of the Israel proper society.
Thank you. Sorry, Ned, you wanted to jump in there.
No, I think what you're saying is what you're saying. I think also dovetails with what you asked. I mean, this does not in itself reach the entire society, and it doesn't in and of itself change the conflict. But I think rather than imagine that they can go from 0 to 100%. It's more actually important to look from reality that this has been built up from the ground and that it's grown. Increasing support for it is very important. I had a very interesting focus group with people exactly the same age as Inbar and Moran just a few months ago at a normal Jewish Israeli school in Jerusalem, in West Jerusalem. Ninth graders, I asked them, some different questions. What do they know about Arabs? What do they think? What do they think about the conflict? These kinds of questions. And I expected, actually, because of all of the negative things that we've heard, I expected to hear some very hostile opinions. And there were a couple of people. There were 15 kids in the group. There were 2 of them that had very hostile opinions towards Arabs and thought they shouldn't be in the country. But the majority did not, and the majority of the students there was sort of mixed between feeling threatened and things like that, but also saying no, but there are good people and bad people. And I asked them, do any of you know an Arab person your age? And none of them, not one. Some of them knew someone who worked with their father or something like this. No one knew someone their own age. I asked, would you like to meet someone your own age? And all of them, except the two that I mentioned previously, said yes, they really would. And I said, do you know any ways to do that? And there was only one person in the entire group that knew, despite all of the programs that we talk about and we know about and we think about all the time, there's only one person in that group of 9th graders that knew of any way possibly to meet an Arab their age. And it was someone who had a Jewish friend who goes to the Max Rehn School in Jerusalem. So I think it's very important to say that there is actually, there is potential demand out there that isn't reached because the capacity isn't there yet. Because as hard as they're working, and they're working unbelievably hard, they don't have the capacity yet. There are measures to support this. Right now, I think there's a measure in the House of Representatives for an international peace-building fund that would support this on an annual basis. You know, things like that could really, certainly could increase, could amplify the voice of the school and of programs like this.
And I think also that what Hand in Hand is really saying is it's not that this, I don't think Hand in Hand pretends in any way that it is representative of what is going on around them, but rather I think it shows what is possible. And with a constant eye to how does one amplify that? How does one scale up and out? While very aware, I mean, even I'm glad the question was asked about your physical location, because I think another striking part is for people who suggest that they're living in a bubble. I mean, the very geographic location itself is sort of loaded enough and surrounded with all the dynamics that go on in Jerusalem that I think that this is, you know, again, seeing this as a sense of what is possible, but needs a lot more work to amplify than what is.
I just want to add one thing, sorry, to this. I think we all find ourselves forever hovering on this seam line between despair and, in our case, determination. That this summer especially, I think really we found ourselves poised on that seam line all the time. And it's easy, there's a lot of reasons to be perpetually overwhelmed by all the reasons why this doesn't work, and it will never work. And we don't have that choice. We, as hand-in-hand parents and community members, we as citizens of Israel, we as people who live in this region, and we as people who live far away but are in many ways affected by this at all times, don't have that choice. And there are a lot of people who don't want this to be their ongoing reality, and who are choosing otherwise, and who would like to choose otherwise. Even in our framework of hand-in-hand, we've got many more people who are on our registration lists. We've got, as I said, we're in the process of selecting our next school and community location. We have multiple groups of parents and communities saying we want to be the next. There is no greater agent of change than a parent who desperately wants their kid in that school that in another year or two they will age out of. We're harnessing that. We want to open our doors to every single one of those people, not just because any school wants to have the reputation, you know, that would merit long registration lists and waiting lists, but because it's a process of social change. And there are many people who want to be a part of that. And one of the key things is to enable that, to give them those frameworks, be it the kids who might always be at a homogenous school but are still looking for it, or be it the families and community members who say, no, this is what we want to be our daily reality. And we even have, with all the challenges of government, also more and more governmental officials coming on board for that. And that is not that's not, there's obviously complicated things at governmental level in terms of people who are very for and very against this also. But the point is, how do you strengthen the voice and the hands of those who want this path? And that's what we're doing every day. And I cannot stress it enough, because when we give in to the despair about this, we basically accept that that's the reality. And for those of us who live it, we can't accept that.
In the interest of time, it looks like we have 3 more questions. So what I'd like to do is take all 3 questions together, and I'll make sure we take notes of what they are and then answer them all that way. So.
Great. I wanted to ask Imbar and Moran a question. You said Moran said that it takes her an hour and a half to get to school. So I'm assuming you have to go through some checkpoints. So you have to get up early and go through them, or not? No. Okay.
Public bus, right, or public,
public
traffic.
Traffic within.
He's got that.
So you live How far away from the school?
Half an hour, but I take the public bus.
Ah, okay. Okay. So this is, thank you for clarifying. So Ambar, in 3 to 4 years, you may be at a checkpoint where you will hold Moran from entering or moving. And what I would like to ask is the following. This may or may not happen. Is the school preparing you to either process that possibility or to think through what kind of options would you have if that happens?
Well, first of all, I know personally that I'm not gonna go to the army in any way. I mean, no
So
way.
that's it.
But we do talk about it. We do think what options do we have if we don't go? Because there aren't many. Some of us can go to Shirut Leumi,
National service.
or go to the army or go to jail. That's basically what we can do. So some of us choose to go to the army, and I know that it hurts some of the Palestinian friends that they stop them at the checkpoint, and but we do talk about it a lot, but no one tells us what to do, because they can't really tell us, no, you can't go to the army. They try to make us say what we think, but not talk themselves. So they won't tell us what to do when you will come out the wrong way.
Thank you. I'm so impressed. Thank you. Thank you.
Next question, please.
I just wanted to ask quickly if you could talk about some of what your methods or strategies are for dealing with flare-ups in the classroom, whether it's sort of after an incident has taken place or a political conversation, sort of how the teachers deal with that, maybe if there's a specific sort of training and how that's implemented.
And if we can just take this last question, then we'll answer this question.
I'll definitely keep it brief. I'm interested in learning more about your community outreach projects that you briefly talked about. Clearly, your model is very tolerant and beautiful. Are there any initiatives to build partnerships, particularly academic partnerships, in other schools who can possibly adopt the same model so that it could be a widespread message instead of being limited in just hand-in-hand model? Thank you.
Okay. So brief responses, and then, we've been doing this for 15 years, so I'm happy to answer questions afterwards for those of you who want. Again, a lot of the work that we're doing in terms of the teachers' training and how to be adept at dealing with conflict in the classrooms, not all of it is conflict about, the broader conflict. It might start with the basics of sharing toys, et cetera. I mean, you're dealing with conflict resolution at all levels, at all times in a school. And so it's just part of a continuum in many ways. And it's built into what we do. Even your co-teaching model of a Jewish and Arab co-teacher, forget about Jewish Arab, but then the fact that you're co-managing a classroom, and then you're often doing it where one teacher speaks both languages and the second teacher will speak one language. And then on top of that, you're dealing with representation. And then on top of that, you're dealing with the broader reality in which we live. So a lot of it's sort of core principles of sitting down, working it through, talking it through, but also giving guidance to that, allowing for first kind of the processing outside of your professional role standing in front of a classroom, and dealing with the emotional side of what a lot of this is about, and preparing people for those discussions. Again, this is the core idea behind this basic guiding principle that might sound very simplistic. We can agree to disagree. Because if you say everyone has to come to a point of agreement, then you can never go home from the classroom to try to get everyone on the same page. Once you say we're allowed to have different opinions, and we're allowing for the honest discussion, expression, and listening and hearing of that, even if you don't agree, and sometimes they can get to be heated arguments. But that's a principle that can take you pretty far, especially when you're built upon these two core ideas of common citizenship and common humanity. The other question about the community outreach, I'm sorry, remind me of your question again. Oh, about partnerships. A lot of our energy is definitely sort of within the day-to-day and making sure this works and expanding this to more places. The partnerships that we're building with the municipalities start to have impact also on the other schools in varying ways, not always so direct, but the way that it starts to influence the way the municipal figures see a lot of things. And I think a lot of our idea of the influence is really about doing what we do well and amplifying that out. And then that sets an example that other people can learn from. Partnerships are intensive, and to do them well, it takes another set of resources. But we do have various partnerships that we do at different levels with other schools, with other institutions, between students, between teachers. And there's now a lot more of demand for that with what's going on. So we'll continue, I'm sure, to do more of that. Yeah.
We have gone over time, and obviously there's so much that we still haven't covered. I want to thank you all for coming. I particularly want to thank all of our panelists. And Inbar Moran, I just learned that there was actually a lottery to decide which students got to come to school. So we're very glad that you both won that lottery. I hope it's good, a good experience for you, and thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Significant when you think about the fact that these students become our citizens. In 1997, to feel histories, religions, cultures, and we want to create something that's shared. With that started 25 kids in a first grade class in Jerusalem and 25 kids in the Galilee, Jewish and Arab. Now, 2014? We now have 5 schools throughout the country. Jerusalem is our flagship school. It goes from kindergarten through 12th grade. Last year was our 4th graduating class of 12th graders, with 620 students this year at that campus. An established school in the Galilee and in Kfar Kara, an Arab village in the Wadi Ara area, the Triangle area. Actually launches a 10-year plan of expanding our network to 10 to 15 schools throughout the country, each with a strong adult community surrounding it.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to talk actually a bit more about the adult community around it and the impact on the community a little later in the conversation. What I'd like to do now actually is turn to Inbar and Moran to introduce themselves, because I think having had this introduction to the school, the next question is, well, who are these students? What is sort of a profile of students who go to this school? And we'd love to hear from you about who you are, what brings you to the school, your experience. I did want to mention, if you don't mind, that we're particularly grateful for you to be here. We know you've had a packed schedule, including last night lighting the Chanukah at the White House for the White House Chanukah party. And we do have a picture outside of that about this in our conversation. The idea and reality of a society shared by Jews and Arabs in Israel. Now, again, not to in any way minimize the attack, but what one could say is that perhaps a somewhat positive byproduct of what happened in the wake of this attack was the remarkable outpouring of support that you saw from outside the school community, from Jewish and Arab communities around the school, from in fact all across the country, from politicians who also got a lot of media attention, international and otherwise, and also, as you'll hear, the way the community itself came together in the wake of this attack. And I think all of that underscores what a unique, and I don't use that term lightly, or choose to use that term lightly. We're going to have Ned comment on this from his perspective later, but the unique role that the Hand-in-Hand School Networks plays in Israel, but in the peace-building community more broadly. And so to talk more about that today, I'm thrilled to introduce and have here with us Rebecca Bardak, who is the Director of Resource Development and Strategy at the Hand-in-Hand Schools, and can also speak from the perspective of a parent of 2 students, a first grader and a second grader, both at the Max Rain campus in Jerusalem. We also have with us Moran Ibrahim, and Imbar Shaked Vardi, who are both 9th graders at the Max Rain campus in Jerusalem. And last but certainly not least, longtime friend and associate of USIP, Dr. Ned Lazarus. Ned is currently an assistant visiting professor at George Washington University. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Lucy Kurtzer-Ellenbogen. I'm the director of our Israeli and Palestinian and broader Arab-Israeli conflict programming here at USIP. Welcome. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces. Equally wonderful, of course, to see some not so familiar faces. We hope you become familiar faces. And I know that we are all very appreciative and looking forward to the opportunity to engage today with members of the Hand in Hand school community from Israel. I'm going to introduce our panel to you just shortly, and I want them to do the work of introducing the Hand in Hand school to you, talking about what it's about, what it is, what they do. But by way of brief introduction and to sort of situate our conversation today, I believe everybody in this room is probably aware that just a couple of weeks ago now, 3 weeks ago almost, on November 29th, the Max Rain campus in Jerusalem, which is the flagship campus of the Hand in Hand school networks, and actually the photographs you're seeing on this slideshow that's running are from that campus. My colleague Britt Manzo and I were there just a couple of weeks ago, a few days after this happened, this being a particularly ugly attack on the campus of the school. Thankfully, nobody was hurt in this attack. 2 first-grade classrooms were set on fire. There was racist and anti-assimilation graffiti plastered on the walls. But I think what makes the attack particularly ugly is that this attack very explicitly targeted the very core, the very heart of what the Hand in Hand schools are about. Namely, and in brief, and again you'll hear much more, and hopefully you might talk later, I can ask you about the Chanukia as well that you were lighting. But for now, we'd love to hear you introduce yourselves in your own words.
So my name is Moran. I live in Jerusalem with my mother, sister, and grandparents. I'm a Palestinian with Israeli citizenship from a Muslim family who has been living in Jerusalem for generations. Those are all my important parts of my identity. So my grandfather was a very well-known person. He was a singer. He was a famous singer. He has his own band. So I'm 14 years old. I went to school in Hand in Hand school when I was in 3rd grade 6 years ago. I was a gymnastic girl, riding horses, and I like dancing, listening to hip-hop music. That's all.
Wonderful. How about you, Imran?
I'm Inbar. I'm also 14, and I'm a Jewish Israeli. My parents were born in Israel, but my grandparents were all from Eastern Europe, and they moved to Israel before World War II. My father's father was in the Palmach, and he helped build Israel, and my mother's father was more in the academic. He won the Israel Prize a few years ago for Persian linguistic.
Former Peace Scholar here at USIP when he was working on his dissertation. And I think it's fair to say that there are few people out there who have the breadth and depth of expertise that Ned has on the field of Israeli and Palestinian peace building. He's done a lot of work, including some work that we're fortunate enough to do with him here at USIP on impact evaluation of peace building initiatives in the Israeli and Palestinian context. And we're going to be asking him to draw on that and to comment from that perspective, situating Hand in Hand in that broader context. So, welcome everybody, and without further ado, Rebecca, could you start off actually and do the situating for us? What is Hand in Hand, its mission, what it looks like, what you do?
Okay,
Great.
thank you very much. So first it's important to understand the broader context in which Hand in Hand is situated in terms of the educational system in Israel. There's basically a tracked system by language and by communal preferences. There's a Hebrew language, an Arabic language school track. Within the Hebrew language track, there's a religious and secular track. As a parent, you have to choose which of these school choices do I want my child to go to? There's no school track which basically brings Jews and Arabs, religious and secular, together in one school framework in which they can grow up together, understand each other's histories and cultures and differences, nor to understand what their commonalities might be, and therefore no opportunity to create common ground. That's one thing when you're students, but it's much more significant